I worked 31 years as a postal carrier in Dayton, Ohio, 31 years of walking the same streets, memorizing the same mailboxes, watching the same neighborhoods change. My feet knew every crack in every sidewalk on Route 14. When I retired, my supervisor handed me a card signed by the whole station, and I cried right there in the break room. Not because I was leaving, because I realized the job had been the most consistent thing in my life for 3 decades, and I wasn't sure what came after it. My wife, Loretta, was there when I got home that afternoon. She had made pot roast, my favorite, and she'd set the dining room table with the good placemats, the ones we only used on Thanksgiving and birthdays. She poured me a glass of iced tea, sat down across from me and said, "Now we get to be selfish for once." I laughed. Loretta had a way of making everything feel lighter than it was. We weren't rich people. We never were. But we were careful. We paid off the house on Elm Grove Drive in 2019, finally, after 26 years of payments. We had a modest savings account and a federal pension that covered our monthly expenses without too much stress. We didn't take extravagant vacations or drive new cars, but we were comfortable. We slept well. That counted for something. Our son Kevin was 34 when I retired. He worked in commercial real estate in Cincinnati. Did well for himself, better than Loretta and I had done at his age. He married a woman named Isabel about 4 years before all this happened. Isabel was sharp. The kind of sharp that made you feel slightly off balance in conversations, like she was always 3 moves ahead of you and knew it. She worked in corporate finance. She wore blazers on weekends. She called me Roger in a tone that technically wasn't rude, but somehow always felt like a small correction. I want to be fair to her. I'm trying to be, because I know I'm not a neutral narrator here. But I also know what I saw and heard and felt, and I'm too old to soften it into something it wasn't. Kevin and Isabel had been trying for a baby for 2 years. When Loretta and I found out Isabel was finally pregnant, we were genuinely thrilled. Loretta cried. I went out and bought a little Ohio State onesie, even though the baby wasn't due for 7 more months. We offered to help however we could. Kevin mentioned they were looking at a bigger house, something with a yard, more room for a nursery and eventually a play set. He mentioned, casually the way he mentioned most things he wanted, that houses in the neighborhoods they were looking at were going for around $400,000. I knew what he was getting at. I didn't say anything that day, but I heard it. 3 weeks later, Kevin came over on a Sunday afternoon while Isabel was at a baby shower. He sat at the kitchen table, the same table where he'd done homework as a kid, and he told me that he and Isabel had found a house. Perfect neighborhood, great school district, big backyard. He said the down payment was the obstacle. He asked if Loretta and I could help. I want to tell you I thought carefully about it. I want to tell you I weighed the decision from every angle. But the truth is, I looked at my son sitting at that table, and I thought about all the years of wanting to give him more than I could, and I said yes before he even finished the sentence. We gave them $80,000, almost everything we had in savings outside of our emergency fund. I told Loretta that evening, and she was quiet for a moment. Then she squeezed my hand and said, "He's our son." That was the whole conversation. They bought the house in March. Kevin sent us photos. Isabel sent a thank you text, 1 paragraph, professionally worded like a letter to a vendor. Loretta read it twice and didn't say anything. The baby was born in June. A boy. They named him Cooper. We drove down to Cincinnati the day after he came home from the hospital. Loretta held him for 2 hours straight and barely put him down. I sat next to her on the couch and watched her face and thought, this is enough. Whatever came before and whatever comes after, this moment is enough. For a while, things were fine. We visited when we were invited, which was not as often as we'd hoped, but we didn't push. Isabel was particular about schedules and routines, and she made it clear, not unkindly, but clearly, that drop-in visits didn't work for them. So we called ahead. We brought things Cooper needed. We tried not to overstay. Then, in January of the following year, Loretta started having trouble walking. Small things at first. Her knee aching, then her hip. Then some mornings she'd get up, and I could see from across the room that something was wrong. We went to her primary care doctor, who referred us to a specialist, who ordered an MRI. The diagnosis was advanced osteoarthritis in both hips, compounded by early-stage peripheral artery disease. The specialist talked to us for 45 minutes. I wrote everything down on a notepad because I knew I would forget otherwise. The treatment plan was manageable but expensive. Physical therapy 3 times a week. Medication. Eventually, almost certainly, hip replacement surgery on both sides. Our Medicare covered a portion. Our supplemental insurance covered more, but there were gaps, copays, and out-of-pocket costs that added up faster than I'd expected. By March, we had spent close to $12,000, and the bigger surgery hadn't even been scheduled yet. I didn't tell Kevin right away. I didn't want to worry him. I didn't want to ask for anything back. That had never been the arrangement, and I wasn't going to make it one. But Loretta's condition became harder to hide. She was using a walker by April. When Kevin and Isabel brought Cooper up for Easter, Loretta tried to stand and greet them at the door the way she always had, and I watched her wince as she pushed herself up, and Kevin saw it too. He pulled me aside in the hallway. He asked how she was doing. I told him honestly, the diagnosis, the treatment, the costs. He nodded slowly. He said, "Dad, I'm sorry. That's really hard." Then Cooper started crying in the other room, and Kevin went back to him, and we didn't talk about it again that visit. I waited 2 weeks, then I called him. I told him we were doing okay, but that money was tighter than expected, and that if there was any way they could help, even partially, even just with the PT copays for a few months, it would mean a great deal to us. I was not asking for the money back. I want to be clear about that. I was asking for help during a hard time from the son I had given everything I had to give. Kevin said he would talk to Isabel. He called back 4 days later. He said they were in a tough spot right now. The mortgage was higher than anticipated. They were paying for full-time childcare. Isabel had cut back her hours after Cooper was born. He said he was sorry. He said he hoped we understood. I sat in the kitchen after I hung up and looked out the window at the yard for a long time. Loretta never asked what Kevin had said. She could read me well enough to know. She just came in, lowered herself carefully into the chair next to mine, and put her hand on the table between us. I put my hand over hers. "We'll figure it out," she said. "I know," I said. And we did. We tightened everything that could be tightened. I picked up some part-time work doing mail forwarding from home, processing address changes for a small fulfillment company. Not glamorous, but it paid. Loretta's sister came up from Lexington for 2 weeks to help out. We applied for a state assistance program for seniors with chronic conditions and got approved for modest monthly reimbursements on her medications. It wasn't easy, but we managed. What I could not manage quite as easily was the feeling that had settled in my chest like a stone that spring. I am not a man who holds grudges easily. I was raised by a father who believed that bitterness was a debt you paid with your own peace of mind. I tried to live by that, but there's a particular kind of hurt that comes not from cruelty, but from indifference. From discovering that the person you built your whole life around, helping, simply does not feel the same weight of obligation that you do. That hurt, I will be honest, took up residence in me and would not leave quietly. We still talked to Kevin. We still saw Cooper when we could. But something was different. Something that I think Kevin sensed but did not address. And Isabel, if she noticed, showed no sign of caring about. The following October, Kevin called to tell us they were planning a family gathering at their house. His in-laws would be visiting from Connecticut, and he wanted Loretta and me to come down and join them for a Saturday dinner. A big family dinner, he said. It'll be good. Cooper's been asking for Grandma. Loretta wanted to go. That was all I needed to know. We drove down on a Saturday afternoon. Loretta brought a peach cobbler she'd spent 2 hours making the day before, sitting at the kitchen counter because she couldn't stand long enough to do it at the stove. She did not complain once while making it. She just sat and made the cobbler. Isabel's parents were already there when we arrived. Her father, Terence, was a semi-retired corporate attorney from Greenwich. Her mother, Diane, wore the kind of casual clothing that cost more than my dress shirts. They were not unkind to us. They were simply operating on a different frequency. They spoke about their renovations in the Hamptons. They mentioned a river cruise they were planning through Portugal. They asked politely about Dayton, the way people ask about places they have no intention of ever visiting. Dinner was catered. That surprised me. Kevin had implied it would be a home-cooked family dinner, but there were chafing dishes set up in the dining room and a woman in a black apron who was clearly hired help. The food was good. I will not pretend it wasn't. We sat down, the six of us plus Cooper in his high chair, and for a while it was pleasant enough. The conversation was fine until it wasn't. Terrence started talking about estate planning. He mentioned, in the easy, offhand way of a man who has never had to be embarrassed about money, that they had recently restructured their trust to better accommodate Kevin and Isabel's long-term financial situation. He mentioned a figure casually in conversation the way you might mention the weather. He talked about how important it was to set the next generation up properly. I watched Kevin nod. I watched Isabel smile in the particular way she smiled when things were going the way she had arranged for them to go. Then Terrence looked at me, genuinely, I think, trying to be inclusive, and asked, "Roger, have you two done much in the way of estate planning? Do you have significant assets to think about passing along?" And before I could answer, Isabel said lightly, conversationally, barely looking up from her plate, "They don't really have much in that department, Dad. We kind of took care of their savings situation a while back." The table went quiet for just a moment, the specific quiet that follows something that lands wrong. I put my fork down. Loretta's hand moved slightly on the table. I could feel her stillness. Terrence looked mildly uncomfortable. Diane looked at her wine glass. Kevin said nothing. I want you to understand what that sentence was. It was not a lie, exactly. We had given Kevin and Isabel money. That was true, but the way she said it, we kind of took care of their savings situation, made it sound as though they had done something for us. As though Loretta and I were a problem that had been managed. As though our finances were a footnote in their story, an inconvenient line item that had been tidied up. I am 63 years old. I worked 31 years carrying mail in every kind of Ohio weather. I raised a son. I paid off a house. I gave that son $80,000 out of love and never asked for it back, not once, not in those words. And I was sitting at his dining room table listening to his wife describe me as someone whose savings she had taken care of. I picked my fork back up. I finished my dinner. I did not make a scene. This is something I am genuinely proud of, because what I wanted to do was the opposite of nothing. But Loretta was at that table, and Loretta deserved a quiet dinner with her grandson, and I was not going to take that from her over my own anger. But I made a decision at that table. A quiet one. The kind you don't announce. After dinner, Kevin walked us to the car. Loretta was getting settled in the passenger seat, and Kevin stood with me by the trunk for a moment, and he said, "Dad, tonight was great. Thanks for making the drive." I looked at him. My son. 34 years old, healthy, standing in the driveway of a house I helped him buy. I said, "Kevin, did you hear what Isabel said at dinner?" He paused. "She didn't mean anything by it." "What did she mean?" He looked toward the house. She doesn't always think before she speaks." "She thinks before she speaks," I said. "She thinks about everything." He didn't answer that. I said, "I'm not asking you to fight with your wife. I'm asking you whether you understand what it felt like to hear." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I'm sorry, Dad. I should have said something." "Yes," I said, "you should have." I got in the car. We drove home. Loretta fell asleep before we hit the highway, her head against the window, the empty cobbler dish in the back seat, because Isabel had given it back to her washed and wrapped. I drove through the dark and thought about what I was going to do. I have a younger brother, Alan, who is an estate attorney in Columbus. We talk every few weeks. I called him the Monday after that dinner. I told him everything. He listened without interrupting, which is one of his best qualities, and when I finished he said, "What do you want to do?" "I want to know what my options are," I said. "You want to talk about the will," he said. "Yes," I said. "The house on Ungro Drive is worth, at current market, somewhere between $310 and $340. We had some remaining savings. My pension and Loretta's Social Security. Between everything, the house, the accounts, the pension beneficiary arrangements, Alan walked me through what a revised estate plan would look like if Kevin were no longer the primary beneficiary. We could direct the house to a charitable remainder trust with Loretta holding lifetime rights. We could redirect the liquid assets to our nieces and nephews, to the church Loretta had attended for 20 years, to a local scholarship fund at the high school I graduated from. We could, Alan said carefully, structure everything legally and cleanly so that Kevin and Isabel received exactly what they had expressed through their actions, that our lives were worth to them. "Are you sure?" Alan asked. "Not yet," I said. "I sat with it for 6 weeks. This was not a decision I was willing to make in anger. I talked to Loretta. That conversation was the hardest one. Loretta cried. Not for herself. She was not a woman who cried for herself easily. She cried for Kevin, for the version of Kevin we had raised, the boy who used to fall asleep on my chest watching football, who called Loretta every Sunday through college, who cried when our old dog died. She said, 'I don't want to punish him for marrying someone difficult.' I said, 'I'm not punishing him for who he married. I'm responding to who he has chosen to be.' She wiped her eyes. She thought for a long time. Then she said, 'Give him a chance to fix it first.' That was Loretta, always the better of the two of us. So I called Kevin. I asked him to come up to Dayton, just him, not Isabel, and have lunch with me. He agreed without asking too many questions. He drove up on a Thursday in December, and we sat at the kitchen table and I told him everything I just told you. The hurt from the spring, the dinner, the comment, the phone call when we needed help, the $80,000 I gave without hesitation and the silence I received when I asked for help in return. Kevin sat across from me and he didn't say anything for a long time. Then he said, "Dad, I don't know when I stopped being the person you raised." I didn't say anything. He said, "I don't have an excuse. I know I don't. Isabel and I have been fighting about money since before Cooper was born, and I think I stopped pushing back on things. It was easier not to. And that's not her fault, it's mine. I just stopped pushing back." He put his face in his hands for a moment. When he looked up, his eyes were red. He said, "What can I do?" I said. "You can start by understanding that your mother has 3 more months of physical therapy and the copays are going to run us about $400 a month. You can handle that." He said, "Done. I'll set up automatic payments this week." I said, "You can also talk to your wife, not about money, about how she speaks about people she thinks are beneath her, including us." He flinched at that, but he nodded. I said, "And you can come see your mother more. Not because I'm asking you to perform something, because she misses you, and she deserves to be missed back." He broke down then, fully, quietly, like a man who had been holding something for a long time. I handed him a napkin. I didn't say anything. I let him sit with it because some things need to be sat with. He drove home that afternoon. He called me the next morning to tell me he had set up the automatic payment. He called Loretta that evening just to talk. She was on the phone with him for 45 minutes. I could hear her laughing from the other room. Things changed after that. Not all at once. These things never change all at once. But Kevin started coming up more. He started pushing back, gently, when Isabel said things that needed to be pushed back on. Isabel herself, and I will give her this, truly, seemed to understand that something had shifted. She was never warm to me in the way I once hoped for. But she stopped the particular kind of dismissiveness that had defined those years. She asked Loretta once, carefully, almost reluctantly, how the physical therapy was going. Loretta told her. It was a 2-minute conversation, but it was real. I called Alan in January and told him I would not be making the changes to the will, not because everything was perfect, but because my son had looked me in the eye and decided to become himself again, and that was worth more to me than any legal document. Cooper is 3 now. He calls me Pop Pop. He has Kevin's eyes and Loretta's laugh, which seems scientifically impossible. But there it is. When they come up to visit, he runs to Loretta first, which I pretend to be offended by and she pretends not to enjoy as much as she does. Last Mother's Day, Kevin took us to dinner. A real dinner, not catered, at an Italian place on Brown Street that Loretta had been wanting to try for years. When the check came, Kevin picked it up without a word, and when I reached for my wallet, he put his hand over it and shook his head once. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. Loretta squeezed my hand under the table. I looked at my son. I thought about 31 years of mail routes, about pot roast on retirement day, about an $80,000 check written without hesitation because love doesn't calculate, and I thought about a dining room table in Cincinnati and the specific quiet that follows something that lands wrong. And I thought about how much it costs to let go of a thing, and how the price is almost always worth paying, and how the hardest part isn't the anger. It's the hope that keeps surviving it. I'm 63 years old. My wife is walking without a walker now, most days. My son calls on Sundays. My grandson calls me Pop Pop. That's the whole story. That's all of it. I've been thinking a lot lately about the difference between patience and passivity. For most of my life, I confused the two. I thought staying quiet was the same as being the bigger person. I thought absorbing things without reacting meant I was strong. But there's a point where patience becomes something else, where it stops being a virtue and starts being a way of letting people believe their behavior has no cost. Isabel didn't say what she said at that dinner table because she was cruel in some calculating, premeditated way. She said it because she had never once been made to feel that how she spoke about us mattered. Not by Kevin, not by consequence, not by anything. And I had let that happen. Every time I stayed quiet, every time I chose the graceful exit, every time I told myself it's not worth it, I was teaching her, without meaning to, that we were exactly what she thought we were. People without weight. People who could be described in passing and forgotten. That is a hard thing to sit with. The role I played in my own diminishment. But here's what I also know. The moment I decided to change that, not with anger, not with ultimatums thrown across a room, but with a quiet conversation at a kitchen table with my son, things actually moved. Kevin didn't change because I threatened him. He changed because for the first time I made him sit with the full truth of what had happened, laid out plainly, without my usual habit of softening it to protect him from discomfort. I gave him the weight of it, and he was strong enough to carry it. That surprised me. It shouldn't have, maybe. But it did. There is something about speaking the truth without decoration that cuts through in a way that nothing else does. Not speeches, not silence, just the plain, unhurried account of what happened and what it cost. Kevin needed to hear that his father had given everything without hesitation and then sat alone in a kitchen processing the answer no. He needed to hear it said out loud by the person it happened to, looking him in the eye. That's what changed him. Not guilt, understanding. There's a difference, and it matters. Loretta always saw Kevin more clearly than I did. She said, give him a chance to fix it first. She was right. She is almost always right about people, which is one of the things I have loved about her for 38 years. Intelligence isn't only what you know. It's knowing whose judgment to trust when your own is clouded. And the money? I want to say something about the money because I know that's what people focus on, the $80,000. I don't regret giving it. I would give it again. What I regret is the silence that came after. The way I absorbed the absence of reciprocity, like it was something I deserved. No one should practice that kind of quiet self-erasure for years and call it love. Real love, the kind that lasts and holds people accountable, requires you to remain a full person inside of it. To have edges. To say, at some point, this is not acceptable, and mean it. Kevin is figuring out how to be that kind of person too, inside his own marriage, with his own instincts. He's doing it slowly, imperfectly, the way all real change happens. Cooper is going to grow up watching his father do that work. That is not nothing. That is, in some ways, the most important thing that came out of all of this. I'm 63. I don't have unlimited patience left, but I have enough. Enough to sit at an Italian restaurant on Mother's Day and watch my son pick up the check without a word, and feel the full weight of that gesture and decide it was enough.